Hello everybody, welcome to Nostalgia Goggles. I'm Chris, also known as Retro Gaming Nerd, and I absolutely love the Super Nintendo. It's one of my favorite game consoles of all time. So when I get the chance to talk about these video games, I really want to. I want to show that the Super Nintendo is a game console that is still worth playing today. And I think I already started that with Mega Man X, but I think if I have a choice to show another game that I think is worth it, it's definitely Donkey Kong Country, you know, for the Super Nintendo. Now, I don't know if this game 100% holds up to many people today, but I'm gonna see if I can convince you and even see if this game is still worth playing today. So let's get into it. In the 90s, Nintendo considered this to be a reboot of the Donkey Kong's franchise. So when it gets right down to it, the story of Donkey Kong Country is pretty easy. King K. Rool is a triflant reptile who stole the Kong's banana hoard, so now it's up to Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong to get the bananas back. With help of Funky Kong, Candy Kong, and debatably Cranky Kong. With that being said, the story is very, very simple. It is just the embodiment of what old platformers are and should be, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with this story. If anything, I think it's kind of funny that they chose an alligator to take bananas. I believe that alligators will eat anything, but I mean, or crocodiles? Crocodiles, whatever. Either way, I think they're crocodiles because they're Kremlings. I was questioning why we said it's a reboot of the Donkey Kong series, but it makes sense to bring that up because none of this makes sense if you are coming from the classic Donkey Kong game. And to be fair here, it didn't need to. There's a lot of other inner working things about it that makes it a reboot, but I have no clue where the Donkey Kong canon is, so I'm not gonna sit here and, you know, talk about the canonicity of it. All I know is that this story is wild for people that paid attention to old Donkey Kong. With that being said, none of this matters if the game isn't good, which it is, so let's move on to the gameplay. Donkey Kong Country is an outstanding game when it comes to gameplay, and it seems very simple, but I absolutely love all the smaller things that make it really good. One of the things in the gameplay that makes this game super good is Donkey Kong and Diddy themselves. You see, Donkey Kong is a heavier character, being able to handle bigger and stronger enemies, where Diddy Kong is faster and is able to jump higher, not being able to take on the same amount of enemies, but once again, is still able to handle themselves. And I really like how that works out. I think another thing that's very interesting about this game is that there are the Kongs within this game, which are Funky Kong and Candy Kong, which do definitely help you out within the game. Funky Kong allows you to move in the barrel plane throughout the map, and it's really nice if you haven't found a save point, but you find him so you can go back to a save point, and that's where Candy Kong comes in. She allows you to save. Another thing that's interesting about this game is that you have rideable animals. I'm not going to sit here and name all of them, but they're also really nice to have in this game. And last but not least, one of the coolest things that I want to talk about in the gameplay itself is that the game never stays the same. There is multiple gimmicks that keep the game fresh. For instance, one of them is keeping a motorized platform up and about. There is the mine car sections, there is the underwater sections, and there is so many other things that come to mind when I think of how this game is varied. It works out very well, and I like how much it does work out. I like how Donkey Kong Country is a platformer that doesn't feel samey. It doesn't get super boring, and I've had that happen a few times, even in the more classic Mario segments of where I got bored of it. Yes, I've beaten them, but when it gets right down to it, Donkey Kong is one of those that just stays super fresh, and I think that that's what makes it so fun, is that it does stay super fresh, and within the gameplay that is. So, with that being said, obviously there's more to this game. For instance, instead of collecting coins, you collect bananas. You get 100 bananas, or 99 bananas technically, or 100, I don't know exactly the number because I don't keep track. I think it's 100, but technically the counter only goes up to 99. But once you get that, you get an extra life. You get the Kong letters, you get an extra life, you know, stuff like that. Simple stuff that I don't feel like it's pointful to bring up. But all in all, this game is super solid when it comes down to the gameplay, and I think that if you have not tried Donkey Kong Country yet, give it a try. With that being said, let's move on to the presentation. Donkey Kong Country's presentation is magical, and I say this because it's something that I feel as I got older I thought would be dated, but it's not. The usage of 3D models to make a 2D game works out very well. From the backgrounds to the character models, enemies, everything, it makes it super iconic and stand out even today. I remember a long time ago, back around my middle school days, where I absolutely feared that this game would become dated, but it hasn't. And if anything, I feel like, in my truthful and honest opinion, I don't really feel like Donkey Kong Country can ever really be imitated. I understand that Donkey Kong Country Returns is one of those games that definitely looks super good and definitely is kind of the same idea, but it visually isn't there, and there's something about the 3D graphics and just the way that this game presents itself is just outstanding, and I feel like Donkey Kong to me will never be the same. And that might just be an old head way to be, but when it gets right down to it, the country games leave behind such a visual presence that is almost unimitatable by today's standards. I don't know how you would do it. It might be possible, there might be a way, but once again, my old head nature doesn't allow me to think about that. Another thing about this that's great is outside of the visuals is the music itself. The music does a really great job at also adding that mystical wonder of just what I was talking about. It's pure magic. This game's presentation is magic to me. I feel like, I don't know, it's hard for me to even say that I feel like somebody younger would look at this and scoff at it, but I think that the visual presence and the auditory presence that's here just works out super well. With that being said, none of this matters if you can't get your hands on the game. So let's talk about accessibility. So Donkey Kong Country has been released on so many consoles that, or so many ways I should probably say, that there's only two that I'm going to kind of stick with. I'll mention one more as well. But this game came out for the Super Nintendo, obviously, and that will cost you about $15 to $20 altogether, which is an amazing price. But it also came out for the Game Boy Advance. I have not played those copies of the game. I'm going to assume that they work very well, because the Game Boy Advance did pretty good with the Mario game. So I'm going to assume that they did well as well with the Super Nintendo Donkey Kong, but I don't know. I'll have to make a video on it when I get my hands on them, but when it gets right down to it, that one will set you back as well to about $15 to $20, which I think is really great that that's the price. There's also been released on the Nintendo eShop back in the day, but that is a thing that is gone, but it was released there, and it was also released on the NSO as of late. So even though these prices are really good, I would definitely just recommend the NSO version of it because it's just right there. I think that definitely though, if you're somebody that's out there trying to collect games for the Game Boy or collect games for the Super Nintendo, this is definitely one that I think you need in your collection, and I think is one that's super accessible for your collection. It is not one of the higher priced games, and I think it works out all in all. With that being said, let's move on to the goods and the bads. I feel like the care that went into the gameplay of Donkey Kong Country is one of the best things, because when it comes to platformers, you can take the easy route and just make it a simple platformer, but thinking about how both characters work, which I'm talking about Donkey Kong and Diddy, is very nice to have that. I think that that's a thing that makes it stand out. Another thing that makes it stand out, once again going back to the gameplay and something I said at the beginning, is the fact that the level design is different in each level and also stays very inconsistent, allowing you to just never 100% get bored with it. Even the simple things. Yes, there's multiple minecart levels. Yes, there's multiple simple platforming levels, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that they're all slightly different. It's better than the level just being super boring, and it just happens with, it feels like it just happens with other platformers, and it feels like they kind of were aware that this platformer could easily just be simple, but instead they decided to take it with, in other words, all I'm really trying to say is that it feels like they put a lot of time and effort into making the game itself, which more power to them for that. I love that. It's what makes me think that this game's great. Another thing that's good about this game is obviously the presentation. Just look at this game. I think that it still holds up to this day, at least presentation wise, because there will never be another game like this. Due to the fact that we're no longer in this era, it feels like this game is going to be something that will always be kind of looked at as interesting due to the fact that they use 3D models and, you know, made the backgrounds the way they did and so on and so forth. I think that this game could definitely be appreciated visually and also audibly, because the audio, once again, like I said in the presentation, is also outstanding. This game is pretty outstanding. I think that when it gets right down to it, even musically, it's one of those ones that holds up so well. Even in Smash, when they reuse songs from it and recreate it, it's awesome. And I think that that's really the only way, in truth, that you could recreate this game is musically. At least, like, you could probably do it gameplay wise, because the Donkey Kong Country games do, but I feel like graphically is the only way that can't be, and I think that that's something that makes this game worth even just looking at. With that being said though, let's move on to the bads. So let's just move on to the final thoughts, because I have actually nothing that I can say that's like bad about this game. If you have issues with platformers, maybe that might be it, but even then, in the modern day with something like NSO, you can just rewind. So when it gets right down to it, I can't think of anything super bad about the game. So with that being said, let's just move on to final thoughts. So, is Donkey Kong Country worth playing today? Absolutely. I feel like this game is just the pinnacle of a game that holds up. I know that one of the things that is hard for me to get over, or at least sell people on, is maybe the graphics, but even then I feel like that's kind of the charm of this game. Everything else is super good and super solid. The gameplay is super solid, with you being able to play as Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong and them being very different. It's really fun. The game itself never stays the same, and I really just like how realistically this game just holds up today. I don't know where this one stands with the rest of the Super Nintendo games, but I do think that this is still one of my favorite games of all time. And I definitely think that if you get a chance, you should play it. There are so many ways to, so just give it a shot. With that being said, what's your favorite Super Nintendo game? I'm curious. With that being said, please subscribe, yada yada. I'm not good at these end cards, so I'll see you guys next time here on Nostalgia Goggles. I'll figure out my hand stuff later. Bye!